So welcome back to another episode, and today I wanted to talk about what got me into the Dragon Quest series. And I've talked a little bit about it a long time ago, but I haven't talked about the entire picture of what made me become a hardcore Dragon Quest fanatic for life. And there's a few interesting stories and revelations that I'm going to share with you guys today. So back in 1989, a little game came onto the scene on the NES called Dragon Warrior. Obviously in Japan, the series is called Dragon Quest. Because of copyright issues, they had to change the name when they brought it out here. So it got called Dragon Warrior. And here's the thing. You couldn't get it in Canada at the time, but I had heard it was out in the United States. So my sister and her boyfriend at the time were really nice enough to take me down to the States, across the border, into Bellis Fair Mall, and there was a kiosk set up in there called Famicom Games, and they sold Nintendo games at this little place there, and it doesn't exist anymore. I would love to have a photograph of this place. I'd love to see it again. It's only in my memories, sadly enough. And so when I went down there and I walked up to the display case, there was this game, Dragon Warrior, which I was looking forward to, but they made this entire diorama of all of the characters, and they had little sequences and little pictures from Japan about how big this series was. And this is before the internet, so I was looking at this display case going, wow, this game is really big in Japan. And I knew Dragon Ball back then, and I could tell that the character designs were based from Dragon Ball's creator, Akira Toriyama. So I'm like, okay, he's done the character designs in this. Obviously, when they brought the game over here, they didn't bring any of his artwork, which is really, really sad. But anime wasn't huge then, not in North America at that point. So I grabbed my copy of the game, we drove back, I played it that summer, and what did I think? It was good. It wasn't unbelievable. And why it wasn't unbelievable is because I'd just been down the road and I played this game, Phantasy Star, a game changer, one of my favorite video games of all time. And I went over to my friends, the Katos back then, and my friend Andrew. We went over to their place. We discovered Phantasy Star. It changed our lives. So I didn't have a Master System at the time, and I really wanted to have a role-playing and gaming experience at home. And I didn't have the Master System. I was frustrated. I wanted to play Phantasy Star, but instead I got Dragon Warrior. So I did enjoy the game quite a lot, but it wasn't Phantasy Star, and that's all I kept thinking in my mind. Now, a couple of years later, Dragon Warrior 2 came onto the scene, and this is a legendary game for myself. I told this story before when I was walking with my friend Andrew to high school. We had to walk down all these stairs, and I hit the track there, and you could see the high school off into the distance like a castle. And I stood there with him, and I just stopped, and I lit a cigarette. And he's like, hey, what are you doing? And I just stood there. And it was like a Monday morning, 8:30 in the morning, getting ready to go to school. And I stood in the track. I wasn't moving, and he couldn't understand why. And I'm like, nah. And he said, what do you mean, nah? I said, nah, I'm taking 2 weeks off. He's like, you can't do that. I'm like, absolutely, I can. And I said, see you, man. And I turned around, and I walked home, and my parents had gone to work, and I had Dragon Warrior 2. And I started playing this game, and it was honestly, I skipped every single day. I didn't take fully 2 weeks off. I took a week off school. And I just sat around and played Dragon Warrior 2. And I really enjoyed this game a lot more. You had more party members. There was a lot more to do. It was a much more fleshed out world. Where the very first game was just a one-player experience. It was a real grind fest, which all of these games are, but one was really took its toll on you, especially that combat music. But 2 really captured my imagination. I loved this game. I thought it was a lot of fun. Now, here's a piece of the puzzle that I've never filled in before. I've never talked about this. And this is really unusual in that this is a huge deal for me. And it comes in the way of a video game magazine called Game Players. Does anybody remember this? The leading magazine of video and computer entertainment. And this is the May 1990 edition. There we go. This magazine, honestly, I hate to say such a crazy thing, but it really had an effect on me. It kind of changed my path, we'll say that. This is the article that changed it all for me. Right here. Dragon Quest IV Fever sweeps Japan. I can't tell you how important it is to understand that we didn't have the internet. We didn't have this. We had nothing. We had nothing. We had magazines, books, as I say, in display cases, showing me the history and the fever of Dragon Quest. I was piecing it together through anything that was translated, anybody who was writing articles. And this article was so exciting to me. Really, an article in a video game magazine was so exciting to me. And if you want to bear with me, I want to read this to you because I think there's a lot of interesting information in here about the release of Dragon Quest IV in Japan in 1990. And we didn't get it till 1992, a few years later. So I was reading this and the hype was building for a couple of years for me after reading this article. So bear with me, I'm going to read this here. I'll show some Dragon Quest footage through this just to keep it entertaining as well. When the manager of a discount store in Tokyo opened up for business one recent morning, he saw an amazing sight. 10,000 youngsters were lined up outside, waiting to get in. Most had been there all night long, huddling together on the street in cold, drizzly weather. Some had brought tents, sleeping bags, and blankets. When police told the younger ones to go home to their families, some of the kids replied that they'd send their fathers to take their place in line. Similar scenes were repeated all over Japan. The reason? It was the first day that Dragon Quest IV, a new fantasy role-playing game for Nintendo, went on sale. If you think the mania in America over Super Mario 3 is phenomenal, it's nothing compared to the excitement generated in Japan by the Dragon Quest series. On the very first day that Dragon Quest IV hit the stores, Japanese gamers bought 1.3 million cartridges. In fact, the game was in such demand that some youngsters had their newly purchased cartridges stolen from them before they even got home. In Daito, a city in western Japan, two fast-moving thieves on a bicycle snatched a Dragon Quest IV cartridge from 11-year-old Kenichi Sumada. In another city, 13-year-old Koji Sakamoto was walking down the street when two older boys bullied him into surrendering his copy of Dragon Quest IV. Police reported similar incidents everywhere. The Dragon Quest series has been growing more and more popular ever since the game came out in 1986. In the past 4 years, Japanese game players have bought a total of 1.4 million copies of Dragon Quest I, 2.3 million copies of Dragon Quest II, and 3.4 million copies of Dragon Quest III. Only the first game in the series has been released in the US because the title Dragon Quest was already trademarked for a board game. The US version was renamed Dragon Warrior and released by Nintendo of America. Dragon Warrior 2 is expected in the US later this year. The hype contained in that article, and as a younger player, as a younger fan of this series, I was becoming a fan of this series. It went through the stratosphere after reading that article. It was so fascinating that the game was in such demand that people were getting bullied for their copies of the game, and that 10,000 people were lined up waiting to get this game in lineups. It was just extraordinary. I mean, I had no idea that the Japanese phenomenon of games and fans was so crazy over there. You know, it was a time when I was fascinated that anime was doing so well in Japan, and it hadn't really come into this country too much at that point, and I was like, man, I want to live in Japan. Japan was so exciting because I was into role-playing games. I was really into tabletop role-playing games. I was getting into computer versions of those, and then I was also getting into console versions with Phantasy Star and the Dragon Warrior Dragon Quest series, and I can tell you, like, I was waiting for Dragon Warrior 4 for years. I got Dragon Warrior 3. I really liked that one a lot. And when 4 came out, I picked up this issue, and I read through that article again, and got really hyped, and I played the game, and Dragon Warrior 4 became one of my favorite games of all time. It's in my top 10 games of all time. It's just one that I absolutely loved, and a lot of it was because of the hype. There was a lot of hype leading into this, and that's what made me become a Dragon Quest fan for life. After that, I tried to find as much information as possible. I bought the manga versions. I bought every single Japanese version of the games I could. I tried to play them in Japanese. You know, I fell in love with the series, and I still love the series to this day. And it's been so many years now. Get this, I have been into this series for nearly 30 years. 29, 30 years at this point. I got into it in 1989 when I first bought Dragon Warrior 1. And you know what's nuts? This is the copy that I bought 30 years ago. 29 to 30 years ago. This is the copy that I got from that Famicom Games. It's still my original copy. And all of these games are the originals that I got back in the day. Really something else to have these. This one is legendary. This is the one that the article is based on. And man, I just want to come in and kind of gush about what really kind of triggered me into this series. And it was that article, which is really, really fascinating. You wouldn't think that, but because there was no information, this was my information. This was my holy grail. And that's why video game magazines were gold back in the day. They really were. I used to just, pore over every single word that any writer wrote about. And writers and the media were very, very important back then. And I just wanted to share my love of Dragon Quest today and kind of what got me into it. So anyways, guys, until next time.